I'm sure, like me, you can think of a number of different occasions where the sound in a movie is what has really punctuated the emotion of the scene. Maybe it's the sound of the Joker's laughing box, giving him the ironic last laugh. Or how about Interstellar's heart-wrenching farewell scene that is set against a cacophony of church organs and the J-cut sound of the spaceship launch?
1, booster ignition and...
In these cases, the sound adds something, but what about when filmmakers omit sound altogether in favour of... So, let's dive straight into an analysis of this technique and look at how various directors have used it for different purposes. Now, I'm willing to bet that for a lot of you, the most obvious example which will have come straight to mind for you in recent years is this beautiful scene from Star Wars: The Last Jedi. Now, this is the most extreme example of this technique because both the in-frame audio, what we call diegetic sound, and the score, what we call non-diegetic sound, has been dropped completely. And it works so well for a number of reasons. Firstly, it's completely un-Star Wars. Think about Star Wars, it's one of the most mainstream, popular franchises in Hollywood, so to do something so unconventional is really striking. In fact, director Rian Johnson said in an interview the reason he did this is because it was completely opposite to what the audience was expecting, which would usually probably be something like this. Notice that the sound of the explosion makes the act more about the actual destruction of the Death Star than the character, whereas the emphasis in The Last Jedi is completely on the sacrifice that Admiral Holdo made. More on this later. The second reason this scene works so well is because it represents the shock that we are meant to feel. It's the entire currency of this scene. It's why we go to the cinema in the first place, to be shocked, to be stunned, to be amazed. So to ensure a holy crap moment, the removal of sound altogether almost resembles how we experience shock in the real world. It creates a disconnect between what our eyes are unbelievably telling us, and what we should therefore be able to hear but can't. It makes us catch our breath, makes time slow like a car crash unveiling before us. Star Wars isn't the only science fiction film to omit sound altogether. It's actually a technique that's used quite a lot in sci-fi films to represent the physical lack of sound that you would get in space.
Alpha, we need backup ASAP!
There are a ton of examples we could look at for this, but my favourite is probably Gravity.
Man down! Man down!
Again, we're shown some devastating scenes, but by siding with science rather than entertainment as far as the sound goes, it not only adds to the authenticity by showing sound in space as it actually would be, but allowed us to hear the panicked voices and breathing that would usually be swallowed up in the wider soundscape.
Must detach. If you don't detach, that arm's gonna carry you too far. Listen to my voice.
Here, sound emission is visceral. It adds authenticity and places the audience in the scene. Yes, there is a score there too, but make no mistake, it's the lack of explosions and the ripping of metal that makes this scene work so well. 2001 is another science fiction film that makes excellent use of cutting sound altogether, but for another reason. The scene I'm talking about is one of my favourites, in which the onboard computer HAL is eavesdropping on the human crew who are starting to suspect that the artificial intelligence isn't actually that reliable.
I've got a bad feeling about him.
You do?
Yeah, definitely. Don't you?
I don't know, I think so.
Hal is so intimidating because of how completely void of emotion and therefore unreadable he is. So when we see Hal lip-reading and understanding their plans to shut him down, no sound effect or music could possibly match the menace represented by the cold emptiness of silence. This one scene tells you everything you need to know about Hal. He's soulless and cold, and it's terrifying. One option we've not looked at is when the diegetic sound is dropped to emphasize the non-diegetic sound, or in this case the score.
I can't stop love.
In the anime Metropolis, the contrast between the visuals of destruction and romantic soundtrack are totally mismatched. An alternative would have been to just do it like this.
Everything's gonna be fine.
But the difference is that in these films, the sound glorifies the act of destruction, just like it did with the Death Star. In Metropolis, the music, and the specific choice of music, makes the scene feel more pivotal. A key moment in time, less about the physical destruction and more about the action behind it. This character is selflessly doing something for the good of others, and to hear the destruction would steal away from the act of heroism. Christopher Nolan uses this technique very well in Dunkirk to emphasize the sacrifice of Tom Hardy's character in this scene. After his engine cuts out from running out of fuel, he decides to go back to protect the troops on the beach. The silence is almost a moment of pause and contemplation for the many sacrifices made in wartime. That last example is interesting though, because the sound hasn't actually been removed in post-production. The sound exists within the scene. Therefore, we are sharing it with the characters. In Mission Impossible, it's used to heighten the danger and risk involved in this high-security break-in.
Come on, move.
If Tom Cruise, or the audience, makes a single sound, the game is up. We've seen this same use of shared silence in a scene recently in A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood, in a far more spiritual capacity.
We'll just take a minute and think about all the people who loved us into being.
I can't do that.
Just 1 minute of silence.
Tom Hanks invites not only his friend to share a moment to be thankful for all the good things in life, but also the rest of the cafe, and even the audience, here for a full 50 seconds. Absolute silence. Visuals in a scene like this are often amplified because when you remove that extra sense of sound, we take in so much more visually. And unfortunately, filmmakers are very often tempted to spell things out literally when it really isn't necessary. Let's take a look at the classic Blade Runner example.
A new life awaits you in the off-world colony. The chance to begin again in a golden land of opportunity and adventure.
Here, we learn everything we need to know about this world, about Deckard, just from what we can see. Now compare it with the theatrical release that has a voiceover. It was completely unapproved by director Ridley Scott, and it's widely considered to be the inferior version. What do you think?
They don't advertise for killers in a newspaper. That was my profession. Ex-cop. Ex-Blade Runner. Ex-killer.
There are hundreds of examples we could look at, and I'd love to hear some of yours. But ultimately, in summary, I'd say this. Dropping the sound is just another device available in the toolbox of different devices to filmmakers. It's a simple case of looking out for where it's been used and why. This will obviously depend entirely on the context of the scene. All we can do as analysts is look for it and question it and marvel at when something new comes along to surprise us. Maybe this video will help you do that. If you've learned something, then please go ahead and leave a like and subscribe if you're new here. If you're looking for where to go next, you could check out my video on how to analyze mise en scene, or you might want to check out how to read cinematography. See you next time.